Hello everybody, welcome back to Kanga TV, home of North Melbourne fans. Welcome to the round 17 review. It's the morning after our 49-point loss to the Western Bulldogs. We have got a lot to unpack from this game. North Melbourne, like I said, going down under the roof at Marvel Stadium. 20 goals, 14, 134 to the Bulldogs. Defeated North Melbourne, 13 goals, 7, 85. I wanted to start this video off by just saying congratulations to Tom Liberatore on a best on-ground performance in his 250th game last night. I thought he was excellent, and so much of this game, pretty much all of this game, was about North Melbourne and their Centenary celebration. So I just wanted to give Libba some flowers where they were due. I thought he was excellent. He's been such a great servant for the Western Bulldogs over the past decade or so, and so I wanted to take the opportunity to just touch on that before we move ahead to North Melbourne. I thought the pre-game, the build-up, and the way we honoured our Centenary celebration was outstanding. I thought that there weren't too many dry eyes in the room for much of that pre-game service, I would say, especially when Dennis addressed the players on the ground before the opening bounce. I got chills and I had goosebumps, when he was speaking, and as, he was building into his messaging. I thought the passion that he still has for the club burnt so bright and was so obvious, and I think we're so lucky to have so many amazing people having worn the jumper and having been a part of this club in so many different ways, shapes and forms, and to honour so many of them last night, and for so many of them to want to be part of it, I think speaks volumes about this football club and what it means to so many people. I thought having Wayne Carey back was so special. It was great to see him in and amongst it, not just last night, but in the build-up over the week. To have Todd Goldstein as part of the Barricade, honouring the players who have played over 300 games for our football club. It was so special to have him back in the blue and white for an evening as well. I just think the way that this club unites so many of us, from the playing group and the staff, past and present, to the fans who were at the ground or watching on at home, I thought was outstanding. The build-up last night was the cherry on top. I thought the way this week has been handled has been excellent by the club. I thought the only missed opportunity from last night was the fixturing itself. Only 25,000 people at the ground. It was a big missed opportunity in my eyes. I think the initial decision to have it in a few weeks' time, we're meant to play Geelong on a Saturday night in round 20. That should have been the original fixture. That was the fixture that was announced last year when the fixture was released for the first half of the year. About a month ago, when the remainder of the 2025 fixture was announced, North had made the decision to move the game forward, bring it to a Thursday night. It allowed us to have the free-to-air broadcast coverage. That's all well and good, but a Thursday night game is quite difficult for a lot of people to get to at most, and the split decision to do so, not giving people that much notice, I think a lot of people had planned their weekend around coming for that game, so that was quite disappointing, and the number reflected that. 25,000 people, like I said, didn't do justice to the significance of the event and of the game as a whole. So look, if that was our only blunder, then we're going to have to suck it up. I'm sure the broadcast at home, and I'd love to hear from, I was at the game, but for those of you who were at home, I'd love to hear what you thought of the broadcast and what you thought of the evening that played out on TV as a whole. For those who were watching at home, I'm sure it was a great spectacle, and it was an amazing spectacle for those who were at the ground, but I do think it was a little bit of a missed opportunity. But like I said, if that's our only blunder of the evening, then I guess that's something we just have to cop and move on. Speaking of moving on, let's park that there and get on to the game itself. It's a very interesting game, I think, for us to unpack. And when the Bulldogs kicked 2 goals in the opening 2.5 minutes of the game, my dad looked at me and said, I think we're going to be in for a long night. And that is kind of how I felt on Wednesday night when the team was initially released. So many injuries, and for a side that has boasted such depth and so much availability across our list up until this point of the year, to suddenly be faced with some positions where we pretty much had no players to fill, it just sort of looked like the end, and the writing was on the wall before the game even begun. So for us to fight back and to pull the game back onto our terms for most of the first half was a pleasant surprise, and it was an epic fight. I thought the character displayed by so many of the players on the field last night was awesome, and I think the game was a matter of partially us running out of legs. I think there's a lot of players who were out there last night who wouldn't have been 100% match fit. A lot of them haven't played too much senior footy this year. We also lost a couple of players, key players, at different parts of the game. And by the end of the game, you've got Will Dawson trying to play ruck and forward and back all in one go. And you've just got too many guys trying to cover the ground. It just wasn't possible. I also think it was a matter of us not taking our opportunities when we needed to. And I think that's what makes the game such a weird one. I think a lot of people are feeling content after that game, and I think there's an issue there when you're feeling content after a 50-point loss. And I know that for the first half we were really competitive and we hung in there for as much as we could of the third quarter, and then the Dogs sort of ran over the top of us in the end. But this is the issue I had on Good Friday, and this is the issue that carries over for me on the back of this game as well. We got pumped on Good Friday, and so we desperately needed a response the following week, and we got that in the 3 weeks following against Port and against Essendon and against Brisbane. Although we couldn't get the results in those games, the effort was much better and the way we played was much better. We looked a lot more united and we looked a lot more spirited, and we really did put in an undeniable effort. And that's, I think, ultimately what you want. So on the back of the game in Launceston last week, or 6 days ago, against Hawthorn, the game was over before it began, really. 10 minutes into the first quarter, that game was over. So you just want a response, right? And a response is what we got. But we've still lost the game by 50 points. And how can you really be sitting here being content with a 50-point loss? And therein lies the issue after Good Friday. It kind of sets you back so far that you have to reshuffle your expectations once again, and therefore effort, which should be a non-negotiable week in, week out, is justifiable, and therefore the result, because the effort was there, is justifiable. And I did say in my preview for this game that if you come out there and you give it everything you've got and you aren't good enough to win, then fine, okay. And there were definitely a lot of contributing factors to this game. And I don't think it was a matter of a lack of effort or a lack of trying last night. Absolutely not. The Bulldogs definitely are a class above us, and the way they move the ball from one end of the ground to the other so quickly and so cleanly is quite frightening. And they are so damaging, and often they caught us out, and often they were uncontested when they were going forward because they were just moving so quickly. It wouldn't even give us a chance to think about it. But you kind of get what I mean. Like, a 50-point loss isn't good enough, especially in a game where I think that scoreline probably flattered the Dogs, to be honest. But that's the issue with the reset of expectation on the back of 85-point shellacking. Going into this game, I didn't give us much of a chance, and I was so happy to be proven wrong in that first half in particular. But that is where we need to start to be a bit more realistic about our expectation, because after the Carlton game, we should have really backed it up strongly against Hawthorn, failed to do that, so it reset the expectation to, well, we just need to bring effort and intensity to the game against the Bulldogs, which we did. Great. But we shouldn't be sitting here feeling content or happy after a 50-point loss. And so that's kind of where I'm struggling a little bit with the result, and I hope that makes sense. It's a weird one, and I can accept that's where we are at this stage, and I can accept there's a lot of contributing factors. The umpiring, it's not the reason you lose by 50 points, but it was absolutely diabolical. A lot of those deliberate out on the full decisions were absolutely laughable, and there were so many inconsistencies in the umpiring during the game. And it's not about the number, it's about what's paid and what part of the ground these free kicks are paid. The umpiring was awful last night, and like I said, it's not something I ever really talk about here on the channel. I don't think that it's a reason that we lost the game. I want to make that very, very clear, but I think something has to be said about how bad the umpiring was last night, because some of the decisions, like I said, were laughable, and some things that were being paid one way and not being paid the other was an absolute disgrace. So I think that was a big issue. The injuries leading into the game, huge issue. Missing some of our best players, and it's not even about them being our best players, but all 4 players that missed through injury this game. George Wardlaw has been in and out of the side all year with injury, and I know his form has been a little bit up and down, but he's such a hard running, hard attacking midfielder. You also take out Luke Parker, who's our other best defensive midfielder. But Parks, Luke McDonald and Jack Darling have all played every game so far this year. So you take those 4 guys out of the equation. You lose LDU to concussion after the opening quarter. You lose Tristan Sherry later in the game through concussion as well. You've got Colby McKercher coming on and off the ground in the later part of the game. He didn't look quite right. You had Will Dawson coming on and off the ground a little bit as well. He looked like he didn't look quite right at some points, and then he was trying to cover every part of the ground. Zach. So there was just a lot happening to our key personnel and our key structure as well. So there were so many factors that contributed to this loss, but also we were our own worst enemy at times. The Bulldogs' ability to push up the ground and we struggled to get the ball out of our defensive 50 so often. And it's been an issue for us, maybe not necessarily that issue specifically, but our ability to get the ball inside our forward 50 has been a huge issue for us because we are quite efficient when we do go inside 50. That was on display again last night. That was a really, really pleasing thing to see. We just weren't going inside 50 often enough, and so often we were turning the ball over on that last kick, leaving our defensive 50 because the Dogs were pressing so hard and their pressure was great. Our pressure was also really good. I thought our pressure acts were excellent. I thought that we were tackling with intensity and with intent, a couple of real bone-crunching tackles there, and I thought our 1%ers were absolutely outstanding as well. So that was, I think, the problem, and maybe the blessing in last night's game as well, and maybe why it doesn't sting for a lot of people as much as a 50-point loss should. It's that we did match the Bulldogs for a lot of the game in general play, and in the first half we were able to capitalise on our opportunities on the scoreboard, but we only scored 5 goals after half-time, and that there is the issue, is where we were matching the Dogs, or where we had control of the general play, we weren't able to get the ball inside our forward 50 effectively, efficiently, and therefore translate on the scoreboard, whereas the Dogs, they were able to get a score on the board multiple times, and it ended up being a bit of a blowout in the end. I think the scoreline probably flattered the Dogs. I thought we were a lot better in the general play and in the contest than a 50-point loss suggests, but you've got to sit here and reflect on it as a whole and look at the reality of it. It's another 50-point loss. It shouldn't have been that way, and we can't accept that scoreline regardless of how the game played out, because it's all well and good to have effort and intensity, but that should be a non-negotiable every single week. And that, like I said, is the issue with Good Friday, and that's the issue with the loss against Hawthorn last week. It's that we are constantly readjusting our expectation, and this game might have been an exception given the injuries that took place on the back of a 5-day break, and the injuries that took place in the game as well, and the umpiring, all these factors, sure, but the bottom line is that we have to stop readjusting our expectation on a week-to-week basis. I think the non-negotiables need to be the same every single week. The expectation somewhat needs to be the same every single week. And I do think an element of last night's loss was us just not being good enough and the Dogs being a class above. But when you break the game down a little bit further, there were quite a few missed opportunities, and we really should have taken advantage of those, and we would have been in this game for a lot longer, and it would have been a genuine chance to take home the 4 points ourselves. Against Fremantle a few weeks ago, Jack Darling kicked a goal right on the 3-quarter time siren, which probably left the door ajar and was probably the catalyst for North's comeback in the final quarter. That, for me, happened last night, but in the opposite effect a couple of times. And it's not a knock on either Nick Larkey or Cam Zurhaar. I thought both of them had excellent games. But when thinking about Nick Larkey and the last shot on goal he took in the first quarter, first of all, that Dylan Stevens spoil on Sam Darcy to start that passage of play, unbelievable. That was so gutsy, and I thought that our team as a whole, for the most part, actually kept Darcy really well held for the first 3 quarters, and we'll get to that in a second. But to kickstart that passage of play, it ended up Nick Larkey lining up for his 5th goal of the first quarter, if you don't mind, and missing it. probably could have changed the game heading into the second quarter. And then Cam Zerha in the third quarter, he kicked a goal with about 90 seconds to go in the third and then took a kick after the 3/4 time siren and it hit the post. If that had gone through, I think that also would have had the potential to change the game in the final quarter. And it's just moments like that. It worked in our favour against Fremantle. It probably worked against us last night, which is a shame. And it's just being able to step up and take those opportunities when they arise. However, having said that, both of them were excellent last night. I mean, Nick Larkey's first quarter just took me back to Glenn Archer's 300th in 2007 and Drew Petrie kicking 6 goals in the opening quarter. It was unbelievable from Nick Larkey, and it is so good to see him back to his best after a quiet sort of 6-week patch in the middle of the year. I thought Cam Zerha was awesome, not just in front of goal, but I thought physically he was quite imposing in the middle of the ground. A few bone-crunching tackles and a few really tough contests, which is something we probably missed from our midfield last night. I thought Paul Curtis was fine, maybe not as lively as we needed him to be, but he did a couple of nice things. I thought Cooper Harvey wasn't bad as well. He did some okay things up forward and down back as well. Definitely showed some good signs. Maybe not enough for me from him, but I think there was a lot of players who probably didn't give me enough of the good stuff last night. It's not to say that the game wasn't good or, like I said, the effort wasn't there. Finbar had a bit of an almost game for me. He almost took a few great marks. He almost did a couple of nice things in front of goal, but a lot of missed opportunities for him as well. And that is probably the difference between him and Jack Darling. It's the experience and it's the polish and it's sort of the full stop on the work. He had some great contests in the air and did really well to bring the ball to ground quite a few times, but we probably needed more for him. I don't know if it was the difference him playing the second key forward as opposed to the third key forward that he had been in his games earlier this season. He also did some ruck work, so it was a bigger load for him to carry, and I think he held himself quite well, but just didn't finish enough when we needed him to. And it's going to be interesting to see where he sits heading into the D's game, because Tristan Cherry went off with concussion later in the game. Hey guys, Mans just jumping in here after I filmed this video. I had a quick look at Tristan Cherry. While he did go off last night with suspected concussion, actually has been cleared of any damage. So I don't know if he will be available to play against the D's. I don't know if they'll risk him, if they'll opt to keep him on the sidelines. I don't know how that looks. I guess more will come to hand later in the week as we look onto the game against the D's. So this discussion around Finbar's spot and who might come in next week could all be a non-discussion if Sherry plays. So just wanted to alert you to that before you watch the rest of this clip. So under the AFL concussion protocols, he will miss next week against the D's, as will LDU. So one of Teakle or CCJ will need to come into the side. I don't know if they'll give Goad a run. I don't know if he's ready yet. I wouldn't be opposed to just throwing him in the deep end straight away, but considering we do probably need an established first ruckman, then I would probably opt for one of the other two in this stage. And then if Jack Darling returns, does Finbar stay or does he lose his spot? It's probably a little bit of a wait and see. And unfortunately for a side that has boasted so much depth and has boasted a really healthy, clean list for majority of the season, all of the injuries have hit us at once at key points of the ground. So I thought the forward line did function well last night. It was just a lack of supply, especially in that second half. To only kick 5 goals after half time definitely wasn't enough, and the Bulldogs probably did overwhelm us a little bit at various stages of the game. But it's nice to see the forward line structure is holding up really well, and we do seem to have players who can interchange and come in when needed, and there's still 1 to 2 players at each game stepping up and being the one to kick the goals. So I love that the forward line structure is still really solid and well held, and we're still able to get a decent output. It's just now the supply that needs to be improved. I think I speak on behalf of all North supporters when I say that I was so fearful of what Darcy was going to do to us in this game. Will Dawson had other ideas. What a performance from Shoddy. He was unbelievable. Sam Darcy kicked 1 goal when Will Dawson was playing on him, and that was from a 50-metre penalty. just absolutely monstered him in just about every single contest. When Tristan Xerri went off in the third with the concussion and he missed the rest of the game, it forced Will Dawson into a new position. That and Will Dawson also coming off a little bit with a potential injury. He was fine, but he kind of came on and off. He was doing a bit of work on the air bike, on the sidelines, but he did play out the rest of the game. He just had to fill in holes wherever it was required and allowed Sam Darcy to have a bit of freedom. But no respect lost and no admirers lost last night for Will Dawson, and we have got a player on our hands. And I thought Griffin Logue battled quite well last night. Toby Pink the same. But it's going to be interesting now when Charlie Comben becomes available to see how that backline shapes up, because I think Will Dawson, by injury, now just needs to get a run of games at it. This is the only way these players are going to start to step up and they're going to start to get experience. It's just by playing it. And on the back of last night's game, he's earned a right to play again next week, regardless if Charlie Comben returns or not. So I think that's going to be a really interesting wait and see. I thought Will Phillips' game was interesting. I actually feel for Will Phillips a lot. He had, I think it was someone said 31 pressure act, and his intention and his defensive pressure is great, but he's just too small. Parker and Wardlaw, what makes them so significant and so important in that midfield is physically they're big, and that's what makes Bull so big in the middle of the ground. Yes, Bull is tenacious and he's fearless and he throws himself at everything, and we love that about him. But it's because he can do it physically. Will Phillips doesn't have the frame to have the same impact. And that is where I feel for Phillips, because his intention is great. His tackling pressure, great. And he tried his best on Ed Richards, and Ed Richards probably got the better of him for most of the game. But you know what Will Phillips is trying to do, and you know what you're going to get every single week. And I love seeing Will Phillips out there just physically not big enough for what we needed last night in that role, coming in to replace George without Parks next to him. Probably made him look a little bit small. Zane Dersma underwhelmed me. I don't think he had as much of an impact on the game as we probably needed to. Bailey Scott, his run and carry is lethal, but his decision making and his execution, that's the reason why he lost his spot in the first place. And when you've got Colby McKercher having another blinder, this guy, the move back into the backline for him has been a game changer. He hasn't put a foot wrong since that Richmond game. But when you've got him doing what he's doing off the half back and giving us the same supply through the middle of the ground with the run and carry, and Riley Hardiman does the same thing, you got to look at Bailey Scott and think, you've probably got to do a little bit better here. We did probably miss his tank and his ability to carry the ball from one end of the ground to the other, but the execution just wasn't there for me. And it is, like I said, obvious now as to why he did lose his spot in the first place. We have too many players who just aren't up to scratch when it comes to skills. And it doesn't need to be perfect with North all the time, but sometimes we just overpossess and we just overcook it and we put ourselves under unnecessary pressure. And that is, I think, we are at times a victim of inexperience and a lack of leadership. We don't have enough players who just want to step up and take the bull by the horns and actually be the one to put the icing on the cake or the nail on the coffin when we need it to be. It's so hard to criticize so much of this game because I don't think a lot of people did a lot wrong. There was no one in my mind that just didn't have a great game. There were some players who were okay. There were some players who did some nice things, maybe not enough, like I said. And there were a lot of players who actually played quite well. It's just none of it was good enough on the night. And sometimes you kind of just have to accept the reality that it wasn't enough for a long period of time. And that probably summarizes the game for me last night. We now have a much needed 9-day break before we take on the Ds, and I just hope we get a little bit of relief at the selection table. George Wardlaw should be available provided that he passes all of these concussion protocols for selection against the Ds, whether we take that risk with him or not. A lot of people are suggesting we just keep him on ice for the year. We definitely can't afford for him to have any more head knocks. So that's going to be an interesting one to see what we do. We definitely will be without LDU and Xerri for the game. I don't know where JD or Parks or Luke McDonald are at. Josh Goda will be making his return to the VFL this week. I don't know if that's going to be enough one game to have him back in the side, but we really could use a good small to medium lockdown defender in defence, which is something we don't have. Every player in that position is injured at the moment, and so we're kind of got a bit of a makeshift backline. So I just happy to accept this game and the result for what it was, because what other choice do we have? Obviously an improvement on last week, and given the players that we were without before the game and given the players we lost during the game, the umpiring and the Dogs just being clearly a class above, all of those things combined just was a bit of a recipe for disaster's not the right word, but just a bit of disappointment. And it was a bit of a deflating result, I think, last night. But we move, and I think at least the effort and the intent that was on display last night should give us a little bit of confidence to be able to go in against the Ds and throw everything we have at them once again. It really is going to be a long wait until the next game and what bodies will be available, who's going to be fit and healthy and okay to take on the Ds, and then we will just make our decisions based on that. How are you guys feeling on the back of last night's game? Leave all of your thoughts in the comments down below. What do you think of the pre-game? What do you think of the game itself? What do you think of those individual performances? I want to hear all of it from you. We can also chat over on socials, Kanga TV show on Instagram, Facebook, X, and email as well. I hope you guys have a lovely weekend and enjoy a little bit of footy-free weekend and some time to just get decompressed. It's been a very emotion-charged few weeks here at North Melbourne and at Arden Street, so I'm very much looking forward to a little bit of time to unwind and digest and process the past few games before looking ahead to round 18 in our final game at the MCG for the season. I hope you all have a great weekend, and I will see you very, very soon. Go Roos.